I was unfaithful and completely shattered my husband's trust. He won't even allow me to touch him anymore. I'm in a unique situation and want to know if anyone else has gone through something similar. I'm not the victim here. The ones truly hurt are my husband, our children, and my parents, who are all bearing the consequences of my past mistakes. I genuinely regret what I've done. Let me be honest. About 19 months ago, I was caught having an affair with a married neighbor, who is also a father of three. I am a 32-year-old woman, my husband is 39, and the neighbor, whom I'll call Steve for privacy, was 27 at the time. Having the affair with Steve was a terrible mistake. It started a little over 2 years ago and lasted almost 5 months before the truth came out. During that time, Steve and I were physically together only 4 times. I understand this might be hard to believe, but I promise it's true. However, I also understand if others find it difficult to trust my words. To address what I imagine are obvious questions, was my marriage struggling? Did I stop loving my husband? Was I unhappy? The answer to all these questions is no. I was completely content and fulfilled in my marriage. I loved my husband Jim and our 2 boys, ages 9 and 11, more than anything in the world. Jim met my emotional, mental, and physical needs completely. He was everything I had ever dreamed of and more. My feelings for Steve had nothing to do with dissatisfaction in my marriage. The attraction was misplaced and came from a deep subconscious place, reminding me of my first romantic experience when I was 18. It was an irrational, animal-like instinct that I failed to control. In high school, I had dated 4 boys, but those were nothing serious, just casual relationships with quick goodnight kisses. I considered all of them friends since we had grown up together. One day, at a barbecue at a friend's parents' house, I met Charles, my friend's cousin. He was 20 and I was 18. From the moment I saw him, I was completely captivated. There was an undeniable connection, like an intense magnetic pull. We talked at the barbecue until he had to leave for work, but we exchanged numbers. The next day, we met for ice cream and went for a walk, talking for hours before sharing a spontaneous kiss. He invited me to his apartment, and that evening, I experienced my first romantic relationship. Charles had a certain energy that made me want to give him all of myself, even though we had nothing in common. Our relationship lasted 11 months before I ended it when the initial passion wore off. A year later, I met Jim, who met all my expectations. I knew right away he was the one. We got married a year after meeting, and for 13 years, our marriage was filled with happiness. We were blessed with 2 wonderful boys who are the spitting image of their father and share his amazing personality. I'm sharing this to explain how my involvement with Steve began. Steve and his wife Marcia moved into our neighborhood as the youngest couple there. My husband and I were the second youngest, while most of the other neighbors were in their 60s. Everyone welcomed Steve and Marcia warmly, and we met them at a neighborhood picnic. That's when Steve and I first noticed each other. It reminded me of the way I felt when I met Charles at that barbecue years ago. The next time I saw Steve was at the car dealership where he worked. My husband and I were looking for a new SUV, and when Jim learned Steve worked there, they struck up a friendly conversation. We returned the following week to finalize the purchase, and Steve made sure we got a great deal with excellent financing. During this time, Steve and I exchanged glances that my husband didn't notice. A few days later, I brought the vehicle back for minor adjustments, and that's when Steve first approached me. In his office, he admitted he wanted to speak with me privately about his feelings. I confessed I felt something too, but acknowledged it was wrong. Steve agreed it was wrong, but admitted he didn't care. The next morning, while our children were at school and our spouses at work, Steve and I had our first inappropriate meeting at his house. Over the next 5 months, we had 3 more encounters, but there was no emotional connection. I loved Jim deeply, and Steve loved Marcia. What we had was purely physical, driven by the thrill of secrecy and danger. Looking back, it wasn't even as fulfilling as what I had with my husband. Being a stay-at-home mom for 11 years had left me craving attention. and I foolishly sought it from Steve. I convinced myself I could have this secret affair while still maintaining a loving marriage with Jim. That delusion ended abruptly one Thursday morning when Marcia's mother caught Steve and me in bed. She screamed at us, slapped Steve, scratched his face, and even attacked me, pulling out handfuls of my hair. I barely managed to grab my clothes and leave the house. When I got home, the reality of my actions hit me hard. I realized I had likely destroyed my marriage forever. I sat in shock for hours before deciding to call Jim and left him a message asking to talk urgently. He didn't reply, so I sent a text, but still heard nothing. Shortly after, Marcia and her mother showed up at my house, pounding on the door and screaming through the windows. I was mortified and didn't answer. Thankfully, my boys were at school. Once they left, I cried myself to sleep on the couch. Later, I woke to the sound of Jim's car in the driveway. I rushed to freshen up and went to greet him, but he didn't come inside. Instead, I watched through the window as he walked to Steve and Marcia's house, where he stayed for nearly 3 hours. When he returned, I tried to apologize, but he rejected it and told me to leave. I begged him to let me stay, but he insisted. He then called my mother, explained what I had done, and asked her to pick me up. When she arrived, she helped me pack some clothes and convinced me to stay at her house for the night. As I left, I tearfully asked Jim how he planned to explain everything to our children. I left feeling devastated and full of shame. That evening, I called Jim, and to my surprise, he answered. He simply said, "Hello," and then fell silent. I identified myself, apologized profusely, and promised that I would never repeat my actions. I vowed to dedicate the rest of my life to making it up to him. Jim didn't respond and remained quiet. I admitted I didn't, and then asked about his feelings. He replied that he knew exactly how he felt, which made me break down in tears. He then told me to stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before coming back home. Reluctantly, I agreed, but asked when I might see him and the boys again. He told me he didn't want to see me yet, but agreed to a brief phone call every evening at 9. That first call ended with me telling him I loved him, but Jim didn't respond. He simply hung up. The following evening's call went the same way. I apologized again, but he remained silent until I finished talking. Then he dropped a bombshell. He wanted a divorce. Hearing this, I broke down completely and begged him for another chance, but he refused. He acknowledged that he would lose half of what he had worked so hard for. But then, unexpectedly, he said he would give me everything he owned if I would just disappear and leave him and the boys alone. I cried harder, insisting he didn't mean it, but he assured me he did. We ended the call and I sobbed throughout the night. That night, I started thinking about how I could convince Jim to stay and came up with a plan. I decided to offer him a postnuptial agreement so one-sided he couldn't refuse it. All I wanted was another chance to prove my love, no matter the cost. The following week, while Jim met with his divorce attorney, I sought out a lawyer of my own, not to prepare for a divorce, but to draft the postnuptial agreement I planned to present to Jim before the divorce was finalized. After consulting 4 different attorneys, I finally found one who specialized in postnuptial agreements and was willing to create a heavily one-sided agreement that would benefit Jim almost entirely in exchange for giving me a second chance. Unfortunately, Jim's lawyer completed the divorce papers in just 11 days, and I was served at my parents' house 2 days later. However, I had Jim served with the proposed postnuptial agreement at the same time. That evening, after reading the proposal, Jim and I spoke. For the first time in 2 weeks, I sensed a glimpse of the kind and caring man I had once known. The agreement was entirely in Jim's favor and gave me an opportunity to prove that I was worth keeping. I won't disclose every detail of the agreement, but I can confirm it heavily favored Jim. If we stayed married and lived together for at least 30 months, he would retain nearly all our marital assets. If I was ever unfaithful again and the marriage ended, I would forfeit all claims to our assets, receive no alimony, and relinquish any child support. Additionally, the agreement required me to find full-time employment within 6 months and contribute to household expenses. It even gave Jim the freedom to date other women if he chose to do so during our marriage. I knew Jim would never be unfaithful. It's simply not in his nature. But I wanted to show him how much I loved him by granting him this option. To my relief and surprise, Jim accepted the agreement, but he added one condition. There would be no requirement for us to sleep together or engage in any form of physical intimacy for the remainder of our marriage. Though saddened by this stipulation, I agreed, believing I could eventually regain his trust, respect, and affection. Things, however, have not gone as I hoped. That's why I'm sharing this now. We are 17 and a half months into what I call our second marriage, but it feels more like we are housemates raising our boys together. I thank God every day for this second chance, but what we have now doesn't resemble a real marriage. It's more like two divorced people cohabitating. Since the affair, Jim has shown no affection toward me at all. Not a hug, not a kiss, not even holding hands. Occasionally, I manage to hug or kiss him before he can push me away, but it's clear he doesn't like it, so I rarely attempt it anymore. Jim also insists that I submit to at-home STD testing every month. He refuses to be seen with me in public, even at family gatherings. When our boys have events, we alternate who takes them, and when it's my turn, Jim shows up but avoids sitting with me. He usually stands on the sidelines with other fathers, acting as though I'm not there. The only times we go out together are for vacations, which we take frequently. During these trips, Jim books adjoining hotel rooms with 2 queen beds each, one for him and me and one for the boys. We sleep in separate beds, but I cherish these trips because they are the only times we come close to reconnecting. I've suggested to Jim that we move to a new neighborhood for a fresh start. He told me he would only consider moving if he received a job promotion that required relocation. Otherwise, he plans to stay until the boys finish high school. The boys don't want to move either, as all their friends live nearby, along with Jim's closest friends. Since the affair, I've lost all my friendships in the neighborhood, leaving me isolated and alone. Stephen and Marcia finalized their divorce 8 months after the day everything came to light. Despite this, Marcia and her children still reside just down the street. The women in the neighborhood, once my friends, have cut me off, holding me responsible for the breakup of their family. My home now feels like a cage, and I rarely venture outside, preferring to stay indoors or in my backyard, tending to my gardens. My boys, however, frequently play with their friends in the neighborhood, including Marcia and Steve's children, and thankfully, their lives remain mostly unchanged. Jim's routine has also stayed consistent. After work, he often spends time with the men in the neighborhood, sharing cigars and bourbon, either at our house or theirs. He goes to work, hits the gym, and then comes home, usually skipping the dinners I prepare. On weekends, he prefers to grill his own meals and only eats what he cooks. Weekday dinners with my boys have become a cherished time for us to bond. We eat together around 4 p.m. when they return from school, working together to set the table, finish meal prep, and clean up afterward. These moments have brought us closer and taught them useful life skills, even in the garden, where we've created a wonderful space. In short, parts of my life are fulfilling, while others are deeply painful. I am unsure whether it is worth continuing this marriage in its current state, or if I should release Jim and ensure his financial stability. Deep down, I know Jim is unhappy and no longer views me as a wife or partner, just as a co-parent. I love Jim deeply and will forever carry the guilt of my actions. I long to rebuild the loving relationship we once shared, but I doubt he will ever allow it. I'm asking for advice on how to regain my husband's trust and affection after betraying him so deeply. Thank you, Amy. Update: last month, I followed some advice and temporarily moved out of our home to give our marriage some breathing room. I rented a furnished apartment nearby and have been living there since. While I miss being with my husband and boys, as well as my gardens, it has been a relief to distance myself from the neighborhood and the bad memories that linger there. all of which I know are my fault. I'm not making excuses for my behavior. When I informed Jim about my decision, he seemed both surprised and somewhat sad. He asked a lot of questions, which revealed to me that he still cares. I could see it in his eyes. I pick up my boys after school, and they often come to my apartment for dinner and sometimes stay the night. Jim and I have a flexible arrangement, allowing the boys to move freely between our homes. The hardest part of being away is that I don't see Jim often, and our limited contact makes it difficult to communicate with him. I find myself calling him frequently with trivial questions just to maintain some connection. We've recently had a few long conversations about various topics, which gives me hope that he still loves me. I know for certain that I love him. Update: life feels like an emotional roller coaster full of ups and downs. Unfortunately, after 2 years of what I consider our second marriage, Jim has decided that it's best for us to get a divorce. He expressed that he still loves me and might consider rekindling a romantic relationship in the future, but he believes remaining married makes it too difficult for him to heal. He explained that psychologically he feels betrayed and disrespected within the context of our marriage, but thinks he could let go of those emotions after the divorce. Jim even suggested we celebrate the divorce once it's finalized, possibly spending one last night together. While this might seem unusual, I am willing to go along with it if it means keeping him in my life as a friend, partner, or lover. He was clear that even if we reconcile, we will never remarry, as he believes a formal contract isn't necessary if we truly love each other. I agree, but I wish there were a way to achieve this without ending the marriage. Regarding the divorce, I've decided to let Jim keep 3/4 of our marital assets voluntarily, even though he didn't meet the conditions outlined in our postnuptial agreement. I won't seek alimony or child support. Some might criticize me for being overly generous, but I believe Jim earned that money and would have shared everything with me had I remained faithful. I'm at peace with this decision, as I can live comfortably for the next 8 years without working. However, I am employed, so my financial situation is even better than expected. To other women who might find themselves struggling with temptation, my advice is simple: resist it. The fleeting thrill isn't worth the devastating consequences. If you're unable to control yourself, seek professional help. Based on my experience, the temporary excitement pales in comparison to the lasting damage caused to love, respect, and trust.
Yes.
I am a 32-year-old man married to Kat. We've been together for 4 years, dating for 2 before getting married. Recently, our relationship has hit a rough patch. It all started 2 months ago when my wife suggested we open up our marriage to bring some excitement into our lives. Her suggestion caught me off guard, as I never expected her to bring this up. To clarify, I'm not trying to control her, but given our history, it's difficult for me to understand her interest in pursuing this. Let's be honest, open marriages are risky and often result in one or both partners getting hurt. I told her I wasn't comfortable with the idea. It's not that I'm against exploring new things or spicing up our marriage, but I want to keep those experiences between the two of us without involving anyone else. She was clearly disappointed by my response, as I rarely say no to her. I love her deeply and usually agree to her requests, even if it means compromising. Although she didn't voice her unhappiness after our discussion, I could sense it. I wanted to understand her reasoning, but I also began questioning my own abilities in our relationship, particularly in the bedroom. I tried to bring up the topic again, but she remained silent. Kat is a consultant with a demanding job that involves working across different time zones, which affects her work-life balance. My job is also busy, but doesn't require me to work odd hours, giving me more stability. Because of her schedule, it has been hard to address my concerns. I regretted my impulsive response, feeling I should have asked more questions before shutting her down. Nearly 2 weeks later, I came home early one evening and cooked her favorite meal. She appreciated the gesture, and we spent some quality time together. I took this opportunity to revisit her suggestion about opening up our marriage. However, she became frustrated, accusing me of playing games. I wasn't trying to manipulate her. I just wanted to understand her perspective. Upset by her accusations, I directly asked if I wasn't meeting her needs. Afterward, she opened up to me about her thoughts. She explained how the interns at her office, fresh out of college and in their early 20s, often party and engage in casual relationships. Hearing their adventurous stories made her consider the idea of an open marriage. She admitted she felt a fear of missing out when her young colleagues shared their exciting experiences. I listened carefully and acknowledged her perspective, understanding how tempting such things could be for anyone. I then expressed that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of an open marriage because I truly value our relationship. What we share is deeply meaningful to me. Before meeting Kat, I had lived a wild life in my 20s, much like others, indulging in similar behaviors. However, I experienced the emotional emptiness that followed, and I found comfort and fulfillment when I met Kat. After marrying her, I realized she was the person I wanted to build a family with and grow old alongside. I shared these thoughts with her and suggested we reconsider the idea if she was genuinely interested. She immediately dismissed the suggestion, seeming to understand my feelings. I thought she had accepted my perspective, but I was mistaken. For a few days, everything appeared normal. Then, about a week later, her attitude changed significantly. She became distant and cold, attributing her mood to stress at work. Lately, her behavior has worsened. She throws tantrums over minor issues and mocks me, calling me old-fashioned. When I asked her what she meant by staying trendy, she accused me of being stuck in my ways. I pointed out that I stay updated on fashion, music, and web series, but I directly asked if my reluctance about an open marriage was upsetting her. She simply nodded, leaving me feeling confused. During this time, her work schedule became increasingly demanding, with late nights becoming more frequent. At first, it was only a few days a month, but now she's returning home late almost every other night, sometimes even at dawn. When I confronted her about this, she claimed she was working toward a promotion and needed to prove her value for the role. While I admire her drive, I couldn't help but worry about what might really be happening. I tried not to jump to conclusions or think negatively, but the uncertainty weighed on me. Yesterday, something happened that compelled me to share my thoughts and seek advice. I arrived home earlier than usual and decided to surprise Kat by preparing her favorite lasagna for dinner. She had mentioned she would be working late, so I messaged her to confirm. She replied that she wouldn't be home until after midnight, which dampened my enthusiasm. I spent the next hour playing video games, feeling hungry but waiting to eat with her. Then, on impulse, I decided to pick her up from work. Something I rarely did unless we had plans. I thought it would be a nice surprise. I rushed to her office, a standalone building that's easy to spot, and waited outside for about 30 to 45 minutes. By 12:30 a.m., she still hadn't appeared, so I went upstairs to inquire at the reception desk. The office was still buzzing with night shift employees, but the receptionist informed me that Kat had already left. Regretting my decision to come, I drove back home only to find that she wasn't there either. At that moment, my main concern was for her safety. Cheating didn't even cross my mind. It was too late to contact any of Kat's colleagues, especially since she'd only been at this company for 6 months and I didn't have their phone numbers. Feeling helpless, I eventually fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up at dawn, I went to our bedroom on instinct and found Kat sound asleep in bed. Relieved, I tucked her in and went back to sleep myself. The next morning, she was already getting ready for work. I asked what time she had come home, and she casually said it was around 3 a.m. due to a busy workday that included a meeting with an Asian client. Curious, I asked when she had left her office, and she claimed it was around 2:30 a.m., which left me stunned. Either the receptionist had given me the wrong information, or Kat wasn't being truthful. Still groggy from the night's events, I chose not to push further. Later that afternoon, Kat called me to ask if I had been to her office the previous night. Apparently, the receptionist had informed her about my visit. While wondering why the receptionist was still there at such late hours, I explained my reasons for stopping by. Kat was silent for a moment, before clarifying that she had left the office in the afternoon for a meeting at a client's U.S. office in another part of the city. This, she said, was why she hadn't been at her office when I checked. I found her explanation puzzling. She elaborated that the client was an Asian company with a U.S. branch and that she participated in Zoom meetings aligned with their time zone. While this practice is common, it left me questioning the situation further. I'm unsure of how to proceed, whether to wait and let things settle or confront her again with my doubts. I've brought up my concerns several times before, but the unease persists. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. Update: I've received some deeply upsetting news and I need to vent. Over the past few weeks, I've tried various ways to access Kat's phone or email, but she keeps her devices very secure. Despite my efforts to uncover the truth, I hadn't succeeded. During this time, Kat continued to come home late from work, and our interactions became limited to brief, transactional conversations. 2 days ago, she was on a call with her mother, who has been struggling with kidney issues and had recently received bad test results. While Kat was lying in bed speaking with her mom, I picked up her phone out of concern to check on her mother's situation. As she talked about her tiring medical routine, something clicked in my mind. I glanced at the unlocked screen, where a notification from a chat app caught my eye. Acting casually, I walked into the bathroom with the phone and locked the door, pretending to listen to her conversation. Through the notifications, I saw messages suggesting that Kat was planning to meet someone that day for a fun ride. I opened her social media messages and, to my horror, confirmed that she was having an affair. She had been involved with her younger, less experienced coworkers. I didn't have enough time to go through all the conversations, so I quickly scanned her photo gallery for evidence. A few minutes later, she realized I had taken her phone and began banging on the door, demanding it back. The gallery was filled with explicit photos of my wife in intimate situations with her coworkers. Horrified, I emailed the images to myself and erased any trace of my activity. She was cheating on me with several colleagues, and the discovery made me feel physically ill, as though I might vomit. Meanwhile, she continued banging on the bathroom door, demanding her phone back. Unable to tolerate her persistent knocking, I unlocked the door, handed her the phone without a word, and immediately locked myself inside again. At first, I wanted to confront her right away, but I managed to calm myself and let my anger subside. The chat notifications included details about the time and place she was supposed to meet someone later that day. Leaving the bathroom, I grabbed my car keys and headed straight to that location. As I left, I vaguely heard her call my name, but I didn't stop or look back. Once at the hotel, I found a shadowy table in the lobby where I could sit unnoticed. My intention wasn't to cause a scene, but to observe her behavior as she arrived to meet her companion. She was scheduled to show up at 5 p.m., so I arrived at 3. Over the next 2 hours, I downed several shots. My initial plan had been to confront her at home, but as time passed, I felt too numb and unprepared to face her, not even in the hotel lobby. By 6, she still hadn't shown up, and I started to wonder if she had sensed my presence and changed her plans. Exhausted, drunk, and emotionally drained, I stayed at the table, drinking continuously. Around 7, I finally saw Kat enter the building, and my heart shattered. 4 hours of drinking had blurred my vision, and my emotions overwhelmed me. What happened next is hazy. Acting on instinct, I stood up and staggered to the reception desk where she was registering her entry. I tapped her on the shoulder and sarcastically wished her good luck with her fun ride. I may have said more, but this is the essence of what I recall. She grabbed my hand, trying to explain, but I couldn't process her words. I shook her off, freeing myself from her grip, and stormed out of the hotel. I hailed a cab and went to my friend Lee's house, where I passed out at his doorstep. The next thing I remember is waking up on his couch the following afternoon. It was Sunday, and I had slept for 16 hours straight. Lee brought me lunch and fresh lemonade, and I poured my heart out, telling him everything. He advised me to secure our joint accounts, change my passwords, and get tested for STDs. While I appreciated his concern, Money and privacy were the least of my worries compared to the emotional toll of betrayal. I found my phone, which had died, plugged it in and turned it on. Immediately, it lit up with a flood of notifications. Over 100 missed calls, 50 voicemails, and countless text messages from Kat, all pleading with me to talk to her. I ignored them. Within minutes, the calls and messages resumed. Overwhelmed with disgust, I blocked her on every platform, refusing even to read most of her messages. Today is Monday, and I've taken a few days off from work, calling in sick. I don't know how to handle this situation. I've been drinking heavily and feel an urge to run away from everything. Lee is helping me find a lawyer, but I feel completely lost. Update: I followed Lee's advice and took steps to secure my financial accounts, change passwords, and get tested for STDs. Thankfully, my test results came back negative. With Lee's help, I found a lawyer and shared the incriminating photos from Kat's phone with him. I've temporarily moved in with Lee while the divorce proceedings move forward. This arrangement works well, since Lee needed a roommate anyway. Throughout this time, Kat has been relentlessly trying to contact me, begging for another chance to start over. She even reached out to Lee, asking for his help in reconciling our marriage. According to her, the hookups were meaningless and stemmed from a desire to feel attractive again. I find these modern notions of desirability and exploration puzzling, and am unsure whether her reasoning is genuine. A few days ago, I sent Lee to my house with the keys to collect my belongings, assuming Kat would be at work. Instead, Lee found her at home, where she broke down and pleaded for his help. Thinking quickly, Lee told her I was staying at a hotel, not his place, to avoid unnecessary drama. During their conversation, Kat admitted she had quit her job. She explained that the affair began when young interns at her workplace started flirting with her. Their attention made her feel desirable and beautiful again, leading her to engage in risky behaviors, including illicit encounters. What began as a one-time incident soon became an addictive cycle. Since the interns didn't earn much money, they relied on Kat to fund their outings and expenses. Eventually, she realized they were exploiting her financially, but by then, she was already deeply entangled in that lifestyle. When Lee asked why she hadn't confessed earlier, Kat claimed that her guilt had driven her to propose an open marriage. She insisted my refusal to consider it made her feel unable to come clean about her infidelity. I find her reasoning baffling. What is the point of asking for an open marriage after already betraying me? Kat is now resisting the divorce, accusing me of being the cause of her one-night stands, but offering no evidence to support her claims. She's also demanding alimony, citing mental distress caused by the divorce. If anyone deserves compensation, it's me. I've endured the agony of betrayal. Later that month, Kat's sister, Amy, name changed, reached out to me, pleading for reconciliation. She told me Kat was going through a severe depression caused by the interns who had tarnished her reputation at work. They had shared compromising photos of her with senior employees, mocking her as easy. This gossip made her the subject of ridicule at work, ultimately forcing her to resign. The rumors spread outside the office, making it difficult for her to get referrals for other jobs. I reminded Amy that Kat chose to abandon a stable, loving marriage for a temporary thrill and now has to face the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, I am moving on with my life. I've kept my drinking under control, focused on working out, eating healthily, and staying productive at work. Although the divorce process has been delayed by Kat's resistance, my lawyer assures me it will be finalized soon.